actual document, 517 pages long. You can see why we had to put a little brochure together, because I have a feeling more people will read this than that. I thought what I'd do today, we often talk about, relationships between two countries in the broad. We talk about how long we've had relationships, we talk about the military and security dimension, we talk about visits backwards and forwards. There's a standard language that we use. Today I thought what I would do is just deep dive into the economic relationship and to just explore why we went through the trouble of constructing a report like this and what we hope to do to build the relationship going forward. And I think that will provide the basis for a very good conversation. So to start off with, just to be clear what we're talking about, this report is called the India Economic Strategy to 2035. It is an independent report to government by Peter Varghese, who was our former Australian High Commissioner to India, one of my predecessors here. He also went on to be our Foreign Secretary for a period. On retirement, he is currently the Chancellor of the University of Queensland. I think by any account, Peter Varghese is considered one of Australia's most eminent Australians, but he is also, I think, one of our most eminent experts on India. So I think the choice of Mr. Varghese to conduct and put this report together was very, I think, an inspired choice. It does in Australia and in India. He established reference groups on either side so he could test his conclusions as he went along, engaged a wide range of Australian and Indian business into this question. And really, the thing that prompted it was a simple realization which Mr. Varghese puts forward right in the front of the report. He says that in the recent years, what we've seen is the Australia-India strategic relationship, political relationship, really click up to what he calls into the top gear. But the economic relationship hasn't matched where we've gone with the political relationship. It's still stuck in second gear, he says. It's not quite got there. So the essential question that the report examines is, how do you take this economic relationship, which everybody agrees we should have a lot more in common than we do, there's a lot of natural things we have in common, it should be a bigger relationship. How do we take that to the next level? Now, I remember myself when I last spoke here at the Foreign Correspondents Club, I talked about the fact that we needed to do more in our economic relationship. So just to give you a couple of examples, currently Australia's exports around the world, India is our 5th largest export market, but 24%, so about a quarter of Australian exports go to China. After that, you have something like about 9%, 9.5% to Japan, and about 9% to the United States. About 3.6% of Australians' exports go to India. That is the same proportion of our exports that go to New Zealand. Now, anyone looking at that data is saying something is wrong with this picture. India's market is so big, New Zealand's is relatively small, and yet we sell as much to New Zealand as we do to India. That's a fundamental question that we were asking. And to be clear that when we were writing this report, when Mr. Varghese was writing the report, he was writing it with an Australian audience in mind. So one of the things he also observed in his consultations was that the level of what he calls India literacy in Australia. So remember, this is a report commissioned at Australians, not commissioned at Indians. The level of India literacy in Australia was still quite low. It's usually the case that when two countries talk to each other, they do it from second-hand information, sometimes slightly old information. That's normal. We operate off stereotypes and those sorts of things. But I think in our case, the low level of understanding about India across Australia, particularly in the corporate sector, was proving to be a bit of a barrier to building the economic relationship. And if I may say so, I think we suffer the same challenge also in the reverse direction about Indian understanding about Australia. So Mr. Varghese concluded that really one of the tasks of this report report is to explain India in ways that are accessible to business, to help them find a roadmap into engaging with the Indian economy. And he's done, and the information in the report actually is very current, it's very comprehensive, and it does actually give a very up-to-date and easily accessible picture of India to Australian businesses, many of whom have not engaged with India for many years or, have outdated ideas. As to what's in the strategy, it's not an academic document. It's really meant to be a practical roadmap for how to do business with India and where do you start. It answers that question, how do we grapple with India? For Australian businesses that deal with East Asian countries, often the entry point is very straightforward. But India is a complex market, 29 states, a very diverse economic base. It's very difficult to see sometimes where you would start. And so what the report set out to do was to find a way to help people find their way in. Along the way, it also sets 3 very high-level goals for an economic strategy. If we are to have a successful economic relationship, the report says, what we have to do is we have to lift India into Australia's top 3 export markets, from number 5 to up to the top 3. The second thing we have to do is we have to make India Australia's 3rd largest destination in Asia for outbound investment. And at the time the report was drafted, this meant a 10-fold increase of Australian investment in India from where it currently was, from $10 billion to $100 billion inside that 20 years. That's quite a challenging goal. And the third goal is to bring India into the inner circle of Australian strategic partnerships with people-to-people ties as close as any in Asia. And that's an understanding that there is a dimension to this relationship that involves people-to-people links in a way and at a depth and an intensity that we haven't really experienced with other economic partners in Asia. And it's a comment on the nature of the Indian economy in that sense. So how do we actually build this roadmap to get us to those goals? What the report does is it comes up with what's known as a sectors and states framework. It says instead of thinking of India as a single country, a single spot, and 3 or 4 areas you might work at, actually come at India as a collection of states. And this is a recognition that every state in India, and I think anyone who lives in India understands that, that's where your diversity comes from. And the second thing it does is says, or think of it as also, come at it from the sectors where Australia and India have particular complementarities, where in fact Australia's strengths and India's strengths, or Australian strengths and Indian needs line up very well. Having looked across the whole range of those things, Mr. Varghese landed at 10 priority sectors and 10 priority states. So you see this in this diagram that's in this document, where you have